Last week, as many of you saw, we rebuilt the shop in my basement. With all the extra lumber left over, I thought that this would be a good opportunity to learn how to build a ramp. You see, when I was younger, my father had built me a few ramps. And almost 20 years later, I've come to realize that I've never built a ramp of my own. Throughout my career, I've had a lot of experience building things out of dirt, but building jumps out of wood, that's a different story, and it's time to put my skills to the test. The goal that I had in mind was to build two separate features, a takeoff and a landing. These features will be tools for this channel. I'll use them to help illustrate multiple skills, so I need them to be as versatile as possible. I knew the general shape of the features that I wanted, so I used an old cardboard box to rough out my idea. While I have not built any ramps of my own, I have ridden plenty, and one of the most common mistakes I've noticed is people tend to build lips and landings much too steep. So, keeping this in mind, I got to work tracing and cutting out the templates. I wanted these to be beginner-friendly features, so 12 inches was the tallest I wanted to go. Sharp edges can be quite dangerous, but also quite intimidating. For that reason, I decided to round off the ends of the ramp, but in the process, I may have gotten a little carried away. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want the landings to be less steep than the takeoff. I transferred those designs to a half-inch piece of plywood and then cut it out with an old jigsaw. The funny thing here is I think this is the same jigsaw that my dad had used to build me my ramps nearly 20 years ago. Since the old plywood shelves measured 24 inches in width, I decided that was the width we were going to use for this jump. We'll cut the support crossbeams at 22.5 inches. This will give us a little margin of error if the jump isn't quite true, which, given the state of the 2x4s we'll be working with, is quite likely. Some of the 2x4s had some stubborn, old rusty screws that wouldn't come out, so we had to be extra careful when making certain cuts. Before framing out the jump, I soaked the surface in water to help make it more pliable. While the plywood was soaking, I began framing up the rest of the ramp. I wasn't exactly sure how far to space out the crossbeams, so I opted to go with 9 inches on center. Each crossbeam was secured with two 2.5 inch long screws on each side. The thing I underestimated the most during this project was just how many screws I was gonna need. Once I was done with the frame, it was time to secure the surface. This is where things started to go wrong. I had greatly overestimated how flexible plywood was. Running out of screws and patience and hunger setting in, I decided to call it a night. The next day, I took a trip to Home Depot where I picked up 2 sheets of 1/4 inch plywood. I drive a Honda Element, so there was no way these things were fitting inside. To my surprise, I was wrong. Somehow, these things fit. 2 pieces of 1/4 inch plywood was really the way to go. It was much easier to bend and work with. Before I installed the plywood, I added a few extra pieces of 2x3s as anchors to help secure the plywood in place. I anchored the 2x3s to the side of the ramp with a single screw on each side. Their only purpose was to help the plywood conform to the bends. To help slowly bend the plywood, I used some bricks that I had laying around. In the end though, I found anchoring a 2x4 to the side and then using a few clamps to be a better solution. If I had a little bit more patience, I most likely would have been able to bend these without any problems. But unfortunately for me, that was not the case, and I ended up getting a little too antsy. After mostly finishing the lip, it was time to get started on the landing. This time, after I cut out the first side of the ramp, I screwed it to the other. This helped ensure that the 2 sides of the ramps were virtually identical. I used a sander to smooth out the curves and then started building the second ramp. I learned many tricks from building the first ramp, so assembling the second ramp went a lot quicker. That's not to say it went perfectly. Some of the screws wouldn't grab for seemingly no reason. Turns out some of the screws had dull tips. Once I was done anchoring the surface to the ramp, it was time to cut off the excess. To avoid having a blunt transition, I cut the excess off in 2 passes. The backside proved to be much more awkward to cut, so I anchored a guide rail to the ramp to ensure a clean cut. I also took the time to fix a few mistakes I made earlier. One of these fixes includes reattaching the edge of the ramp, which I accidentally broke off. This fix though is mainly just for looks. I then sanded the ramp down to smooth it out and reduce any future splinters. I also took this opportunity to sand off any areas where the plywood had cracked. While this was not perfect, it definitely helped smooth out any square edges, which gave the ramp a more polished look. Since I will most likely be storing this ramp outside, I decided to add a primer and sealer to the surface. This will not only extend the lifetime of the ramp, but also gave it a cool battleship look. The last touch I added was to add a few racing stripes to the edges. This helped give the ramp a little bit more definition. I'll go ahead and lower the volume here so we can all enjoy this oddly satisfying sound. At this point, we had ourselves a jump. The only thing left were some friends to help come test it out. Thankfully, I knew just the right people.
Hello?
Hey, Noah, what's going on, man?
Nothing much, just getting ready to go for a ride.
Well, that works out because, you see, I just built a sweet ramp and I need some friends to come over and test it out.
I'll grab some buddies, we'll be right up.
Alright, sounds good, man. See you in a few.
Hey, Phil!
What's up? These kids didn't wait for me to tell them what to do. They wasted no time getting to work. One of the more important features I decided to include on this ramp was the addition of a case plate. The case plate is a flat bit on the top of the landing that gives the rider a little margin of error when they're learning how to jump. This helps the rider feel more confident knowing that they're not going to die if they come up short, but at the same time there's still a distinct knuckle which gives the rider something to aim for. Since these are two separate features, we can do a lot of things. The obvious one, of course, is varying the length of the jump. Moving the ramps further away or closer together is a good way to learn how to judge your speed. Once you get comfortable, you can hit the jumps in either direction, which these kids did without any hesitation. The landing alone is a good feature for learning how to get up and over difficult objects on the trail. Our friend Jake here said there is no way he was going to be able to bunny hop onto this, but with a little practice and a lot of determination, he was able to get it no problem. This is a good demonstration that your bike and relative size to your bike is not the reason why you can't bunny hop. Punches are another good skill to practice on this feature. The rounded edge will help save your back wheel in case you come up short, which is handy because learning how to time punches can be rather tricky. The way these features are shaped makes them good features for obstacle courses. A setup like this mimics a technical trail section where you cannot fit in a pedal. The rounded tops plus the sloped backsides makes these features just enough of a challenge for beginner riders when they're pushed together. Here is my friend Watson learning how to conquer this all on his own. Nice job, Watson. Big thanks to our friends Noah, Koa, Jake, Watson, and Brad for showing us just a few ways we can use this feature. I'm going to go ahead and call these jumps whales, and I think they'll make a nice addition to this channel, and hopefully this video is enough to get you guys inspired to build some of your own ramps. If you're interested, in the description below I'll include a link to the dimensions of these ramps. I will also include a playlist of a few other ramp building videos that you may find useful. If you have any suggestions for skills we should learn with these ramps or what we should build next, let me know in the description below. As always, my name is Phil Metz. Thanks for playing bikes with me today, and I'll see you guys next time.